This volume deals with two great field commanders, General Omar N. Bradley and General George S. Patton, Jr. I had the rare privilege of knowing both of them, and I visited each at his wartime headquarters in Europe, Bradley at 1st Army and 12th Army Group, and Patton at 3rd Army. In fact, General Bradley personally placed me in a Special Intelligence Communication Unit assigned to 1st Army. Perhaps the best comparison of these two leaders was made by General Eisenhower in his book, At Ease. Based on his close association with him, he said, "Of all the ground commanders I have known, and even of those of whom I have only read, I would put Omar Bradley in the highest classification. In every aspect of military command, Brad was outstanding. Patton was a master of fast and overwhelming pursuit. Headstrong by nature and fearlessly aggressive, Patton was the more colorful of the two, compelling attention by his mannerisms as much as by his deeds. Bradley, however, was master of every military maneuver, lacking only in the capacity, possibly in the willingness, to dramatize himself. This, I think, is to his credit. Bradley was 7 years junior to Patton on the regular Army promotion list and served under the latter's command in North Africa. Circumstances, however, reversed their positions. When General Eisenhower went to London before Overlord, he had already determined that Bradley should be his senior field commander. Patton, under a cloud for conduct off the battlefield, was assigned much later under Bradley. Patton was happy. He didn't want to command any unit above Army level. Therefore, Patton served as 3rd Army commander under Bradley's 12th Army Group. In retrospect, it turned out to be a wise decision.
Paris, spring of 1953, almost 10 years after liberation. Flags of many nations stand in harmony at the Palais de Chaillot. A general, chairman of the American Joint Chiefs of Staff, arrives to take part with other world leaders in a program of peace based on a union of Western strength, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Soft-spoken, honest in his opinion. To his intimates, he is known simply as Brad. To everyone, he is Bradley the soldier's general, the personification of a great army, a great nation. With all that he stands for, this man has no sense of destiny in his makeup. He never had it. Even when he moved along the broken paths of mankind's greatest war, he moved as a soldier, with a soldier's determination. Bradley the strategist, perhaps the greatest in modern warfare. Bradley the man of quiet dignity, but he had a punch that packed a terrific wallop. He smashed ahead with a force of almost 1.25 million men. No American general ever had exercised direct field command over so many combat troops. The end of the Nazi road. Here we see him at Berchtesgaden, the mountain retreat of a tyrant who had felt destiny driven to rule the world. With a soldier's determination, Omar Nelson Bradley had won a brilliant campaign. He had come a long way, this general, geographically and otherwise. From the heart of America, from a state that had known many famous Americans, Mark Twain, Champ Clark, George Graham Vest, General Pershing, President Truman. He was to serve as general under not one president, but 3. In addition to Harry S. Truman, seen here at Potsdam, Germany, There was Dwight D. Eisenhower, his former wartime chief. And wartime President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. 50 miles from the Missouri River on the birthday of Abraham Lincoln, Omar Bradley was born into the home of a poorly paid country schoolteacher. The year was 1893. In country such as this, he learned to fish, hunt quail, became an expert marksman. He was the only child. The name Omar came from a family friend, not the Persian poet. Bradley idolized his father, acquiring from him a way of life. To patch up the family budget, the elder Bradley did some farming. From such roots, the boy learned the meaning of patience, the patience that comes with fishing. Bradley was only 14 when his father died. After high school, what? It was hard to say. He sold newspapers, worked at the Wabash Railroad shops at 17 cents an hour. But a Sunday school teacher suggested West Point. And West Point it became, the United States Military Academy. Here had studied Lee, Grant, Pershing. The class of 1915, Brad's class, was to furnish 56 generals. One could say of Bradley, as quiet as the Hudson, a trait that was duly noted by his class biographer. True merit is like a river. The deeper it is, the less noise it makes. This was Bradley. And they wrote further of him. His most prominent characteristic is getting there. Just how much prophecy was in this remark? Let us see. In World War I, he commanded an infantry company at the Butte, Montana copper mines. His own evaluation, ruin. He was left out of the fight. 1920, ordered to West Point as an instructor in mathematics. From 1924 to 1939, Army schools, routine duty periods with troops in the United States and Hawaii. Then on to General Staff in Washington. Finally, in the early part of 1941, Commandant of the Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia. Was he getting there? Well, he was acquiring the reputation of a fine infantry officer. There wasn't a thing these men did that Bradley couldn't or wouldn't do, for he had great physical endurance. February 1943. Bradley was in Florida training a division for duty overseas. World War II was in its second year for the United States, and Bradley was to be included in the fight. Word finally came to report to French North Africa. For the first time in 32 years as a soldier, Bradley was off to war. Selected by Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, who had been watching this great infantryman for years. Now as Deputy Commander and Commander of the U.S. Second Corps, he helped push the Tunisian campaign to victory. British Commander General Sir Alexander says, well done. Bradley tells all about it in his book, A Soldier's Story. Was he getting there? As they would say out in Bradley's country, he fought to beat the band. After Africa, the invasion of Sicily. Bradley took Second Corps into Sicily under General George S. Patton's command. Plans for the Channel assault on France were well underway when General Marshall sent word to Eisenhower, "My choice has been Bradley. he meant for Bradley to lead the American forces for the great Normandy invasion, Operation Overlord. As commanding general of the First Army, Bradley was ashore less than 24 hours after the first Allied units hit the Normandy beaches. The Battle of Europe was to be a doughboys battle, and leading these doughboys was a man who, in the words of General Marshall, was fit for any command in the Army. A week after D-Day, and we had linked the Allied forces together in a beachhead 42 miles wide. A prime objective, the port of Cherbourg. As Bradley's First Army pushed ahead, happy Frenchmen began to breathe the first fresh air of liberation, and we began to feel at home. Hard nut to crack, those Nazis. At all costs, they meant to keep us from getting a harbor, a suitable port for our supplies. Nazi commanders now felt the power of Bradley's punch. For once Bradley made up his mind, he moved swiftly, relentlessly. Was he getting there? Following the Battle of Saint-Lô, he headed the 12th Army Group. As American forces plowed ahead, they moved out of the peninsula, then toward and beyond Paris. 43 divisions were to be deployed under Bradley's command. The 12th Army Group included General Courtney H. Hodges' First Army, General George S. Patton, Jr.'s Third Army, General William H. Simpson's Ninth Army, and General Leonard T. Giroux' 15th Army. No sit-back at headquarters type of general, Bradley inspected a battle in person, traveling in an ordinary jeep. There wasn't a bit of glamour or fanfare in his whole tall, lanky frame. He got the most out of his men by patient goodwill. He knew every division commander by his first name. When an officer performed as he expected him to, he gave him a free hand. When he hesitated, he tried to help him. And when he failed, Bradley relieved him, and all respected him. Even Patton, Bradley's chief in French North Africa and Sicily. In fact, George S. Patton became one of his closest friends. What did Bradley think of the boss, and vice versa? There was a mutual trust. Stout-hearted and confident of result was the way the chief described Bradley. Many battles justified faith in Bradley, but one especially was the big breakout. battle for Saint-Lô, and the breakthrough from the peninsula, one of the most decisive battles of Bradley's military career. The breakthrough cracked the back of the Nazi Wehrmacht. Bradley had created it, planned it down to the last detail. Uprooting meant taking quicker and firmer root in freedom's soil. Out came our armies. The way was open. The way to Paris. The enemy west of Paris was destroyed. As he fell, the liberation of France lay only days away. That the Bradley breakthrough worked was due to a soldier's determination. Our hopes now ran high for a quick end to the war in Europe. Paris, liberated. Bradley could have gone into Paris himself, but the quiet man from Missouri was not built like that. He had waited for his chief. A liberated nation honored him. Bradley was to receive many decorations, as well as honorary degrees from universities. Someone has said of Bradley that he always behaves as though he were a civilian among men in uniform. Even as Paris celebrated, something was happening. After the fastest blitz of modern war, we had to apply the brakes. Logistics, that age-old problem of supplying a mighty fighting force on the offensive, had run into difficulties. We had lost momentum. The deep stalemate of winter set in. Then, quite suddenly, counterattack, the Battle of the Bulge. The greatest crisis in Bradley's military career. Dark moments, unpredictable moments. It was the enemy's dying thrust. We were thrown back. Even when the enemy was a few miles from his headquarters, Bradley refused to move back. He reasoned such a move could destroy confidence. Your identification, General. From stars down, solid proof was needed these trying days that you were not a Nazi disguised as an American. The Battle of the Bulge over, the Rhine soon came into view. There wasn't much more to it after this. Operation Overlord, which had swept a relatively unknown general into great prominence, had blasted asunder the myth of Nazi invulnerability. From the Omaha beachhead to Berlin, a stunned enemy wondered how it could have happened. Farm boy to 4 stars. Was he getting there? True to American tradition, the job helped make the man, and the man made history, and he never once lost his humility. Was there room for a 5th star? With a soldier's determination, but no, with the determination of a man enjoying the softer moments of peace. Bradley, a top-notch golfer, scores high on the fairway. But a hop, skip, and a jump from the fairway was busy Washington. And in post-war America, Bradley played a big role in world affairs. Affairs as they pertain to our survival as a nation. We see him here in the fall of 1948 as Army Chief of Staff. Prior to becoming the Army's chief, he had spent 2 years as Veterans Administrator. With him are Air Chief Hoyt Vandenberg and Navy Chief Louis E. Denfeld. In Bradley's characteristic way, he considered his job another opportunity to serve his country, and America needed him. For a new type of world jitters had set in, the Cold War, modeled by the Kremlin. For example, the great airlift of 1948 and 1949. Starved the people of West Berlin came orders from Moscow. So the Red Army imposed a blockade on all overland transport between Berlin and the West. All trade stopped. Industrial paralysis threatened West Berlin. But not for long. The air was still free, and from the free nations poured fabulous supplies for the people of West Berlin. The airlift broke the blockade, our first victory in the Cold War. This type of war called for a reassessment of our military objectives. And that's where Bradley fit into the picture. He became a globetrotter, a sort of soldier diplomat. Here we see him arriving in Germany. His mission, to discuss plans for collective security with member nations of the North Atlantic Alliance. This was to be insurance against aggression by Soviet Russia. Bradley, the world headliner. The story of Omar Bradley would not be complete without mentioning the former Mary Elizabeth Quayle, who married Bradley a year after his graduation from West Point. Here she watches Bradley being sworn in as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff by Defense Secretary Johnson. With great pride, Mrs. Bradley will tell you that Omar is a considerate husband and father. As chairman of the Joint Chiefs, America's top soldier took his seat at the first meeting of the Defense Committee of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization held in Washington. To resist aggression. That was the keynote. Yes, there was room for a 5th star by act of Congress and the deep respect and admiration of a fellow Missourian. A little trouble with the pin, but both Bradley and the President made it. Farm boy to frequent visitor at the White House. This is early in 1951 at a Security Council meeting. He sits beside the man who, along with his father, signalized his ideals in life, General Marshall, at this time Secretary of Defense. And again at the White House, with ministers of defense and military advisors of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Bradley paid almost 300 visits to the White House, many of them to brief the President on the progress of the war in Korea. Again, he visited war rooms, this time under the banner of the United Nations. As a global military strategist, Bradley believed that we should not press our military advantage too far in this one area of communist aggression. The fighting raged from June 1950 to July 1953. Precarious times. At stake was our global prestige, our voice in the free world. This war by satellite, was a new type of Soviet aggression, where the Kremlin directed a conflict in the front yard of Korean homes. As in World War II, Bradley helped direct Allied forces close to the battle lines. And so it came to pass, from the year 1915, a West Point classmate of Bradley's, Ike by name, went places too, becoming President of the United States. He is playing host here to our top soldier of the nation and other members of the class of 15. Time, May 1953, shortly before Bradley's leaving active assignments. It seemed fitting at this time to name an American town after Bradley. To quote Bradley, "No boy ever came out of an army camp with any more or any less moral fiber and any more or less courage than he had when he left his family fireside." Bradley, West Virginia, on U.S. Route 21, between Beckley and Mount Hope. Did he get there? Well, seems like there's more to do. Mission, to help in military reorganization. He has come a long way, this general from the humble roots of America, to enrich our heritage of service to mankind and love of country, a living monument among the truly great men of history.
Patton was a master of fast and overwhelming pursuit. Headstrong by nature and fearlessly aggressive, Patton was the more colorful of the two, compelling attention by his mannerisms as much as by his deeds.
It's not easy to believe that George S. Patton, Jr. was once just Georgie. From his earliest years, this lad believed he was going to be General George S. Patton, Jr. His imagination was stirred by stories of great heroes of the past, told by his father. His military career began at VMI. At West Point, he proved himself a model cadet, although, like Washington and Napoleon, he could not spell. Rarely from this time on would Georgie flash this attractive smile. It just didn't go with his very serious ideas of soldiering. He established the first football team for soldiers to keep them from wasting their off hours in drinking and gambling. World War I, convinced that this ponderous vehicle would someday come into its own, He studied it, rode into battle on it, became a hero alongside it. Our first tank commander, he would always be linked with the weapon that symbolized his driving, overwhelming personality. After the war, the tank school at Fort Meade. Two officers here shared a deep military interest, Ike Eisenhower and Georgie. The fierce expression, his get-up at masquerades, reflected some deep instinct to play the role of warrior or fighter. His wife joined in, sensing that even in fun, these roles suited her soldier husband. A time came, as it had before, when the clothing of battle was to be worn by millions of Americans. November 1942, in command of American forces for the invasion of North Africa, Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr. One of the outstanding features of a brief campaign was Patton's bold leadership, and later, the favorable impression he created on French and Arabs alike. Long-range plans could now be discussed. Plans which would cast America's toughest general in a leading role. Meanwhile, a battle was raging to the east in Tunisia. Roused to a pitch of fighting spirit, entered the fray. Allied leaders such as General Alexander sensed Patton's remarkable military gifts, his judgment, his sure instinct for what the enemy would do. Patton set a tank trap for Rommel. Rommel marched right into it. His 10th Panzer Division lost half its 60 tanks, retired, and never attempted a counterattack. His reputation grew. He looked forward eagerly to his next campaign. He'd been selected to command a new army, the 7th, slated for the conquest of Sicily. The day from Patton to his men. Remember that we as attackers have the initiative. We must retain this tremendous advantage by always attacking, rapidly, ruthlessly, viciously, without rest. Keep punching. God is with us. We shall win. Attack, attack, and when in doubt, attack again. Patton's major principle for fighting battles or a war. His chief mission, he believed, was to arouse the morale of his men. He urged them on, certain that speed and boldness could shorten the war. Like Monty, he believed in showmanship. But he was aware that if the act could not be carried off in fine style, the men would see through it. Both leaders used every means to inspire the troops of their vast command. Sicily proved to be a model campaign. Sound tactics and a fighting spirit won the island in 38 days. The Supreme Allied commander paid a visit. Passionately involved in the work at hand, Patton had acquired a reputation for being tempestuous, sometimes rash. There was a question as to his role in the invasion of Fortress Europe. Then, his whereabouts carefully concealed from the German High Command, he appeared in Great Britain. New troops heard him in an introductory speech and called him Old Blood and Guts. The old-timers referred to him as the Old Man, who knew more about fighting than any man alive. He called a spade a spade. He told them to get mad and stay mad. They listened. On D-Day, behind Bradley's First Army, another army assembled. Patton's Third. With plenty of armor, this outfit was like its commander. Fast, hard-hitting, spirited, spectacular. The Cherbourg Peninsula began a rolling advance, an all-out smashing attack, the Patton version of a German blitzkrieg. The old man had said, "The harder we push, the more Nazis we'll kill. And the more Nazis we kill, the fewer of our men will be killed." Pushing means fewer casualties. The Third took the old man at his word and found he was right. St. Malo, the beginning of a long list of towns, occupied by Germans one day, liberated the next. At the head of a vast crusading army, a man fulfilling a destiny he had dreamed of since early youth. The attacks now were in all directions at once, toward the south and north, and east toward Germany. The Third advanced like a tidal wave, and the enemy's response was fear. He told his men, "In the last 2 weeks, the Third has advanced farther and faster than any other army in history. My intention is to move farther and faster still." Outrunning its maps, the Third Army crossed the Seine. In his words, he was touring France with an army. He was everywhere at once, covering the great distances within his command. His use of light aircraft exemplified his eagerness to adopt any new means of increasing efficiency. Throughout, the 19th Tactical Air Command of the 8th Army Air Force gave incredibly close support. The astounding advances went on and on. Patton saw nothing in the way. He was ready to push on into the heart of Germany. Struggling to keep up with his fast-moving front was a miraculous supply effort known as the Red Ball Express. But now Patton's supply lines were strained to the utmost. Winter was approaching. Other Allied armies were feeling the pinch. The Third was ordered to hold up, to take the defensive. Nothing but defeat itself could have made the general more depressed. This was a difficult time for an army built to roll. The tension for Patton was finally eased. He was assured by his old friend that the Third would eventually receive adequate supplies to resume what they had begun. Patton urged his leaders to keep high the morale created during the offensive. He himself delivered the pep talks for which he was famous, giving credit, instilling pride, urging men to even greater deeds. Then, the green light. In 400 years, this fortress city had withstood every assault. Metz was no cheap victory. But the fall of this highly regarded fortification bore out Patton's belief that no defense position had ever been successfully defended. With General Walker at the front, new plans now. A great drive toward the highly reputed Siegfried Line. But an instinct for what the enemy will do had alerted him to a new danger. Field Marshal von Rundstedt struck with 20 divisions on a 40-mile front. The Battle of the Bulge. Patton was asked to speed what help he could. Could it be in 3 days, Ike asked? Patton's armored troops would make it in 2, dashing 100 miles over icy roads to Bastogne. the heart of a major attack, Patton's concentrated armored power. Terrible weather prevented a much-needed air attack. A religious man, Patton frequently prayed. This time, a prayer went out on thousands of printed cards for all his men to join him. Almighty and merciful Father, grant us fair weather for battle. Now the enemy was on the defensive. In Patton's book, they were destined to fail. The Third broke the back of the German offensive and began preparations for their own. Always the old man pushed them harder than anyone had pushed them before. Always the results were more than they might have expected. For a commander who was so obviously a winner, they would do the impossible. Patton believed in decorations, in recognizing and exalting the heroic qualities of his men. And they sensed his sincerity when he used words like duty, patriotism, and loyalty. To him, these words had real meaning. The Siegfried Line. In Patton's words, this monument to the stupidity of man cracked easily. The famous Third was now on the loose again, on a spring rampage that would bring the war to a close before summer. Again, Patton's army was going beyond expectations. The enemy believed Patton would pause at the Rhine. He went right across. Now along a wide front, his divisions fought toward the final goal. Always he took time out to give credit where it really belonged, to the men, to Private Harold A. Garman, the Medal of Honor. Exalting sacrifice, Patton never dwelt long on the horrors of war. But as his Third Army overran concentration camps in Germany, he saw horror of a new kind. Victories piled up as the Third turned southwest to link up with Soviet forces in the Danube Valley. It was over. For a moment, Patton relaxed his carefully maintained role of colorful leader to be himself. On his return, Americans showed their gratitude. In General Pershing's words, it didn't hurt America to have a general so bold that he was dangerous. Los Angeles went all out in its reception. With him was General Doolittle, whose 8th Air Force in Europe did so much to assure final victory.
Although no unit, no individual won the war, we're fortunate in having one here tonight with us who had a large part in winning the war. I'm pleased and proud to have been privileged to fight by the side of General George Patton.
Your Honor, the Mayor, General Doolittle, soldiers, ladies and gentlemen, coming over here, there was a very great lesson. The first 4 hours, we passed over a destroyed land, utterly destroyed. You who have not seen it do not know what hell looks like from the top. That's what Germany looks like. That's what Austria looks like. That's what any place that the 8th Air Force and the 3rd Army worked on looks like. You must remember this, that from Brest to various towns in southern Germany and Austria, whose names I can't pronounce, but whose places I have removed, the trail of the 3rd Army and the 19th Tactical Air Command and the 8th Air Force is marked by more than 40,000 white crosses, 40,000 dead Americans.
Few realized how deeply he felt about his men. Germany, with no more battles to win, Patton watched Americans compete on the playing field. Again, he saw the fighting spirit, the will to win, a quality he loved and admired, and which epitomized himself. Struggle was the test of a man. War, the supreme struggle, provided the highest test. He had expected his own death to be spectacular. In this one prediction, he was more mistaken than in the planning of any battle. He died of injuries received in an automobile accident 4 months after the end of the war. Place of burial among the men of the 3rd Army who had fallen in the Battle of the Bulge. His personality lives on in his statue at West Point. He lived for action and glory and reached the heights in serving his country.